Did you know that your employee benefits at your job can support your journey towards building wealth? And as such, did you know that if you take the open enrollment period seriously, you don't just ignore it, that you can positively affect your ability to build wealth? Oh, really? You did? Okay, guess you don't need me then. But really though, sometimes we underestimate the value of the benefits offered to us through our employers. We can get access to things for free or at a relatively cheap rate compared to getting them on our own outside of our jobs. In some instances, we only have access to things through our employers. In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of open enrollment, what it is, what to expect, and 4 common benefits offered by employers, but specifically how to think about them from a wealth building perspective. So if you want to tackle open enrollment like a boss, maybe you never understood what it was or what you're doing, then let's get into it. Hello and welcome. My name is Lissa. I'm a personal finance expert and accredited financial counselor, and I am the co-host of NetNet Podcast, where me and my best friend analyze the hidden costs of every aspect of life. Are financial advisors worth it? Are pets worth it? Is collecting stuff worth it? So make sure you check it out and let me know what you guys think. Before we jump into open enrollment, a little bit about me. For over a decade, I worked at one of the biggest companies known for their amazing employee benefits. In hindsight, I feel like I fumbled the bag. I worked there for 11 years, and for the first 7 to 8 years of my career, I didn't really understand my employee benefits and how good they were, and how I could use them even further to contribute to my wealth building goals. I understood them from the perspective of needing health insurance and a few other things, but I never thought about utilizing my benefits strategically. So I didn't really think of them as part of my financial plan or my financial life. I didn't consider them as part of my pay or the compensation that I was getting from the company. So there were definitely things I didn't utilize or take advantage of that could have really helped my finances in the long run. Anyway, enough about me. Let's get to the part where I think you can do better than I did, and at the very least, understand that these benefits as part of your employee package, if you have one, they have monetary value, and that can go a long way in your financial life. To start, what exactly is open enrollment? Open enrollment is a fancy term for a period of time that happens every year at your job, and it's when you can sign up for or make changes to some of your benefits at work. Benefits are a more indirect form of compensation from your company, and they can typically include things like health insurance, vision insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, retirement plans, tuition assistance, other types of insurance, and other perks. These can sometimes be referred to as fringe benefits. That's just a tax term. And you might also have access to other fringe benefits from your employer that actually have nothing to do with open enrollment. For example, discounts to things. Like if you work for Disney, did you know that they offer complimentary theme park admission to their employees? So that's not something you have to opt into or not opt into, and it has nothing to do with open enrollment, but those things also have value. Quick side note, if all of this sounds foreign to you, maybe you've never heard your job talk about open enrollment, maybe you've never had to do it, then it's possible that you don't have it. If that's the case, feel free to bookmark this video and come back later when you have more benefits through your employer, or just watch it all the way through because I think you'll still get stuff out of this video. Some reasons you might not receive benefits or have this open enrollment period could be that you're a part-time or a seasonal worker, maybe you're a contractor and not an actual employee of that company, or it could be that you're at a small company that doesn't offer benefits like that. For those of you who do have benefits, what happens during open enrollment? So open enrollment usually lasts for a few weeks. The exact time frame is dependent on your employer. So in the lead up to this period every year, you'll probably be getting emails or other reminders from your company, from your HR team that are telling you open enrollment is coming up, this is when it starts, this is when it ends. During those few weeks of open enrollment, you're going to be given a chance to review your options, what is offered to you, and choose the benefits that best fit with your needs and your budget. Now, this is the part where it's kind of tricky to decide what to elect, like what benefits to actually say yes to, say no to, because you can't just ask everyone, ask your best friends at your job what they're doing and try to replicate that and do the exact same thing, because it really depends on your own needs for a lot of these things. Now, we're in the fall season, and the reason I'm releasing this video now is over 3/4 of companies do their open enrollment periods around November. A lot of companies do it in the fall because coverage periods typically start on January 1st and last the entire calendar year. So they're just trying to get everyone's elections in, get everything organized so that everything can kick off for the next year. Overall, I just want to point out that it's important to pay attention to when this date is, because it's the only time you can really make changes to these specific benefit elections. There is a special enrollment period that might allow you to make changes during other times of the year, but you can usually only utilize that under very specific circumstances, like major life events. Maybe you get married, have a baby, maybe you lose other health insurance that you have, and a couple of other reasons. So in open enrollment, logistically, what happens is, like I mentioned, one, you're going to be notified about your open enrollment period before it starts. Don't be that person who ignores all the emails. Usually your company will send multiple emails about this, so make sure you know when it is. Then at some point, you're going to be provided information such as how to make your selections, basically a website where exactly you're going to log into. You're also probably going to be provided information about all the various benefits available to you. So sometimes this is in the form of an email or a PDF. Sometimes it's just directly baked into that website when you're actually making your benefit elections. There'll be places you can click to get more information. Then from there, you kind of just go down the list and you make your selections of what you opt into and what you don't opt into. Then you'll be told how much of a deduction on your paycheck it's gonna be.
What? It costs money?
Yeah, I know it sucks to have more money come out of your paycheck, and it can affect your net take-home pay, so the money you actually get from your paycheck. But we're gonna get to that in a minute, and we'll touch on the upside of these various benefits. So let's talk about 4 of the common benefits offered to employees and how you might want to think of it from the perspective of your financial strategy and your entire financial situation. Rather than just looking at these benefits in a vacuum or things that you need or want in your life, I want you to think of them as additional tools towards helping you build wealth, because that's really a benefit of these benefits. Number 1, no surprise here, health insurance plans. Did you know that in the United States, 60% of all people under the age of 65 have health insurance through their employers? So when your employer sponsors your insurance, this is typically referred to as employer-sponsored health insurance. This is a benefit where basically your employer helps to cover the cost of your health insurance, your medical insurance. And as you probably know, health insurance coverage will help you lower the cost of visits to the doctor, stays at the hospital, prescriptions, other types of medical care. You're probably familiar with this, so I won't spend too much time on it. Just know that employers usually offer several plan options. For example, you might see PPOs or HMOs, and those differentiators are really about how much they cover and your ability and flexibility to choose between healthcare providers, with PPOs typically having more flexibility, but typically costing a little bit more. So how can this benefit help you build wealth? There are a few ways that employer-sponsored health insurance can be beneficial for your finances. Number 1, having health insurance in general reduces your financial risk. So like all insurance, you are paying for this thing that reduces your risk. You are passing on some of that risk to your insurance company. For health insurance specifically, what it does is it gives a clear structure of what you may have to pay, both for expected medical costs and also unexpected medical costs. So think of it like this. If you don't have health insurance, you can end up at the hospital and have something happen to you that costs a lot of money, and you're going to owe that money. When you have health insurance, you might still have co-pays, deductibles, co-insurance, things that you might have to pay, but there's a structure to how much you'll be liable for, and typically an upper limit. So if your medical bills go through the roof, at least you'll know this is the most you'll have to pay in a given year. Another benefit for employer-sponsored health insurance are pre-tax premiums. So employers in general aren't just always giving us all these benefits out of the goodness of their hearts. Yes, there is some of that. They want to retain employees, but sometimes it benefits them as well because they can deduct some of these things from their taxes. But for health insurance specifically, in many instances, when you have to pay a portion of that premium, you'll see it as a deduction on your paycheck. Usually those premium payments aren't included in your taxable income. Lower taxable income for you specifically as an individual, in short, means you are going to have less taxes owed to the government. So in general, in the world of finance and personal finance, it starts to become a game. You want to lower your taxable income. That doesn't mean you want to make less money. You want to make more money. You just want to reduce how much is actually taxed. And certain deductions like this can help you do that. All right, another financial benefit here is getting health insurance through your job technically frees up cash flow. This might be hard to fathom, especially if you've never been out of work, but if you didn't have your job, you would likely be paying a lot more for health insurance. So this discount that you technically get by getting it through your employer keeps your monthly expenses lower, and in theory, that should free up cash flow for you. All right, and number 4, another benefit related to building wealth when it comes to an employer-sponsored health plan is you may have an option for a high deductible health plan, which would allow you to open a health savings account, which is something I'll talk about later in the video. On the surface, it sounds like high deductible sounds bad. It sounds like you're gonna be paying more, but we'll talk about that in a second. So another side note, in the world of finance, the more you learn, you're gonna see that different financial experts have their own opinion of whether you should get this account or that account or do this, don't do that. Health insurance, I would say, is pretty much, there's no downside to this particular benefit. It really is going to help you limit your risk and limit your financial responsibility. We all have to take care of our health, so that's kind of a no-brainer. All right, let's move on to the second example of a benefit typically offered through your employer, and that is a flexible spending account. This is sometimes referred to as your FSA. And the Society for Human Resource Management actually says that 63% of employers offer this medical flexible spending account. What it does is this account lets you set aside pre-tax dollars to pay for eligible healthcare expenses. There's also a specific one for dependent care expenses, but I won't get into that in this video. You basically decide how much to contribute each year to this account, up to certain limits that the IRS sets. They're going to have a limit to how much you can actually put in it. And then that amount is going to be deducted from your paycheck throughout the entire year. So yes, it is your money. You're spending your own money on your own medical stuff, but the benefit is that this is going to be pre-tax money. So again, we are lowering your taxable income. Before I talk about the benefits of a flexible spending account, let's quickly talk about the cons, the downsides. So major downside here is what is called the use it or lose it rule. Unused funds, so you put money into this account all year. If you don't use the funds, typically at the end of the year, you're going to forfeit that money. This is when it becomes a really, really great skill for you to generally understand what your cash flows are, how much money you make versus how much money you spend. Because if you have an idea of that monthly or even throughout the year, like looking back at the last 12 months, then you'll have an understanding of what you might pay on medical expenses in the next year. Obviously, we're not psychics, we can't predict the future, but you can get a reasonable estimate so that you don't contribute too much. The last thing you want to do is contribute a big ass amount to your FSA and then lose those funds. On the flip side, if you decide to use this account, you don't want to contribute too little and then not actually get enough of a tax benefit from it. All right, another downside is there are limited eligible expenses. So you can only use this account on IRS approved expenses, but it's safe to say you can use these funds to go see your doctor, to buy different types of medication. All right, and then the biggest downside is that it's not portable, meaning you don't get to keep this account if you leave your employer. So it's kind of just there for when you're working at your employer if you choose to have this account. Now let's talk about the benefits and how you can utilize the FSA to help you build wealth if that is an account you choose to get. So number one, tax savings. We talked about this earlier in the video, but the pre-tax nature of the funds that you're putting in this account helps reduce your taxable income, which could reduce your tax liability. This is going to be a recurring theme the more you build wealth, is reducing tax liability, paying less in taxes, and then using that money towards saving and investing. Another benefit to the FSA is immediate access to your funds. So I mentioned that you'll be contributing to it all year based on how much you elect. Let's say you decide to put $1,000 into this fund. If you get paid bi-weekly, that's about $38 per paycheck. So even though you'll be contributing to it all year, you can start using it at the beginning of the year for healthcare FSAs. Wink, wink, which means if you are planning to leave your job, there's a case for leaving your job at the beginning of the year after you've used the entire FSA balance. That's because if you haven't contributed that $1,000 to it yet, and you've actually used it out of your FSA, and you leave your job, you don't actually have to pay that money back. So that's less of a wealth building tool, just more of a fun little tip, but nice to know. So this account is great if you want some tax savings and you have a general estimate of what you think you might spend in a given year. Remember that use it or lose it rule, so you don't want to over contribute and be rushing at the end of the year trying to see all kinds of doctors that you don't even need to see. So you might be like, well, why wouldn't I get an FSA? Just put a little bit of money in it. I'll probably use this amount for regular medical expenses. Well, a big downside that I didn't mention earlier is that you generally can't have both an FSA and an HSA, a health savings account, at the same time. There's a small nuance because if you have a health savings account, you might be able to open what's called a limited purpose FSA if your job offers this, but that's beyond the scope of this video. Just know, generally, you can't have both an FSA and an HSA. All right, the third common benefit I'm going to talk about in this video are HSAs, health savings accounts. So these accounts, similar to the FSA, they allow you to set aside pre-tax money to pay for eligible medical expenses. Let's start with the downsides first. So number one, eligibility is strict. If your employer offers this HSA, you can't just say, yeah, I want it, I want to put money into it and start saving for medical expenses. In order to qualify to have one, you have to also have what's called a high deductible health plan that I mentioned earlier. So your deductible on your health plan means this is how much you basically gotta spend before your insurance kicks in. If cash flow is really tight, it might be hard for you to commit to a high deductible health plan, but there are ways to plan for that. So generally, a higher deductible can mean higher out-of-pocket costs for healthcare now, right now in the current year, especially at the beginning of the year, because you're just gonna be paying more before that insurance kicks in. Number two, another downside, contribution limits. So every year, the IRS sets a maximum amount that you can put into this account. So even though it's known for its tax advantages, these relatively low caps restrict how much you can save. And number three, another downside, higher penalties. Hopefully you never have to pay penalties. You can definitely avoid it. But basically, if you use this money for non-medical expenses before the age of 65, not only are you going to be taxed on it as income, remember you put that money pre-tax because it's supposed to be used for medical expenses. If you don't, you're going to be taxed on it when you take it out. But on top of that, there's a 20% penalty, which is higher than a lot of other penalties for things like this. All right, now it might be sounding a little bleak to use this account, but let's talk about how to utilize this account from a wealth building perspective if you choose to go this route. Number one, triple tax advantage. So contributions are tax deductible, right? We said it's pre-tax, it's gonna lower your taxable income for this year. Now, it's gonna be invested. This is money that's gonna be invested in markets. So that money is gonna grow in your account. It's not just gonna, if you put $100, it's not just gonna stay $100. Over time, it's gonna grow because it's an investment. Typically, when you make money in that way, there could be taxes paid, but in this type of account, that growth is going to happen tax-free. And then for other investment accounts like this, typically when you take money out, you are going to be paying taxes, like if you've made gains from the account. But in this particular account, if you take it out for medical expenses, you won't be paying taxes on that money. So when you use this account for medical expenses that are approved by the IRS, then you won't ever pay taxes on this money, including the investment growth. So that's very rare to see in the world of investing. All right, number 2, ownership and portability. Unlike the FSA, like we said, is use it or lose it, and you don't take it with you when you leave the company. For an HSA, you don't have to use it in the current year. You don't have to use that money in the current year, so you don't have to worry about losing it. And in fact, you probably shouldn't touch the money if you do contribute to this account. When you put money in there and you let it grow over time, that's really the wealth building strategy for using this account. And because it's your account and it's money that's going to be invested, this is actually going to grow your net worth. When you have an FSA, you don't count that money towards your net worth because it's not technically your money. Whereas in an HSA, think of it kind of like a retirement account. When you put money into it, that's your account to keep. It's just that there's specific rules on how you can use the money and access it. All right, before I wrap up this video with the last benefit, the last thing I'll say about the HSA is it's still not 100% that everyone should do the HSA and have the high deductible health plan. It really depends on your cash flow situation and your medical situation. Because if you have tons and tons of medical bills and you don't have the cash flow to support that high deductible, then you might want your insurance to kick in sooner. Otherwise, you're gonna fall deeper in debt, right? But then another thing is if you have, for example, like chronic conditions that require regular medical care and you have a lot of regular medical expenses, in order to do the high deductible health plan and HSA, you still kind of want to make sure that you have money for those current medical expenses. And while you can pull that money from the HSA, it's a balance of leaving money in there to really let it grow and get that advantage of its growth. Because like I said earlier, there aren't too many tax advantaged accounts that allow you to have your money grow and then you don't end up getting taxed on it later. In this case, specifically if you use it for approved expenses. All right, let's get on to the last item on the list because I already feel like this video is kind of long. And that is group term life insurance. So I'm specifically going to talk about group term life insurance because that's what employers typically offer. If you're offered something different, for example, a permanent policy, then that's great. That has other actual built-in capabilities for building wealth. But in this video, I'm going to talk about what most people are offered, which is group term life insurance. So what it is it's either at no cost to you or it's very cheap to you, like a couple dollars per paycheck. And what it does is it defines a designated amount of money to be left to one of your beneficiaries. So you have to name someone that you care about, that you want money to go to. And then it will pay out that amount of money to your beneficiary if you die, if you pass away. Without getting into the nitty-gritty details, I think some confusion I typically see with clients is they have this group term life insurance through their job. The group part means that it's through your employer. You're part of a huge group of people who have basically a shared insurance pool. And so what happens is if you're still working at your employer, you typically have this active, and if you pass away while working for your employer, then your beneficiary gets that benefit. If you leave your job, then you won't be covered. You won't have that benefit for your beneficiary. Small nuance to that, which I will get to in a second. So let's talk about some downsides. So downsides of a term policy, especially one through your employer, is there's no cash value to it. right? There's no money being added to your net worth. There's no way you can withdraw any money from this. It's literally just there to pass on to a beneficiary if something were to happen to you. So technically, term life insurance actually is not known to be a wealth building tool, at least not for you. So what I mean by that is if you have other types of insurance policies, for example, permanent life insurance, there's typically a cash value associated with that. You're putting money in, there is a death benefit, but there's also basically like an account of money that if you really wanted to, you can cash it out. The reason I'm including it on this list as a potential wealth building tool is something I hear from a lot of people is that generational wealth is important to you. So generational wealth, essentially passing on wealth to the next generation, specifically someone in your family, like your kids or someone you care about. Life insurance of any kind is a relatively, inexpensive way to do it, term life included. So even though you're not building your own wealth, if you have a policy and something were to happen to you, it could help your beneficiaries with their finances and building wealth. Now, the small nuance I mentioned earlier, if you leave your employer, you typically don't have your policy anymore, but some employers give you the option of porting your plan or converting your plan to an individual policy. So an upside to this is even though you'll be paying the premiums, so you'll actually have to pay for this policy instead of your company paying for it or instead of it being just a couple of dollars. One of the upsides here is that typically, they won't ask you any medical questions or make you take a medical exam. Just know that in the outside world, outside of your employer, in order to get some of these life insurance policies, sometimes you'll be asked questions about your own health because that determines how much coverage you can get or if you can get any coverage at all. All right, that was a lot. I hope this helped. And if you have any additional questions about your employee benefits, something you're not sure about, drop your questions in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. And until next time, peace out.